I think there's a lot of work that's done for the sake of work. If we're all digital, why can't that just be generated in the way you like it for the person? Why are we spending time making artifacts when we could be focusing on work? When I say I'm the mayor of Toyville, it's like I think everyone is the mayor of their own digital life. In a company, and you can look at the history of like capital going back to 1800s. It's been kind of like top down, restrictive. This is like a zero authority models. So the CEO gives away financial authority to the CFO and the technological authority to the CTO. But if that system's all in place, then why do we even need to like have reports and these because the data should all just trickle up as well as it trickles down, right? And I think that just kind of shows how antiquated many org charts are. And I think AI is able to kind of like do things that you couldn't do before.
Yeah. From startups all the way up to Microsoft, what drew you to product management and conversational AI in particular?
I think I actually been thinking about redoing my bio because I've been in tech for 30 years.
Wow.
Because when I was 15, I went into a program done by Bill Gates prior to the Bill Gates Foundation, where he gave the city of Chicago a ton of computers for their libraries. And so they hired a bunch of teens to show people how to use the computers in the community. And I think that is basically my Spider-Man origin story because I quickly kind of understood like I was a kid who was like tech savvy, but I quickly met people that were just in the library because they wanted to see the sports scores from yesterday or the weather or getting all kinds of different cases. And it quickly kind of like shook out my uh, smart kid syndrome, knowing everything because it's like I'm talking to World War II veterans and teachers and, people, religious people from the community, and they all had way more knowledge than me about so many different things. They just needed to know this like simple, cool tech trick to use to like further that knowledge. So that's kind of like all that I've done since, if I think about it, in a deconstructive way. Because when I got into product, it was at the long road of like working my way up from like customer service and tech and, being employee number 5 at a company, you get to like sit next to the CEO. So you start absorbing the CEO and you're hanging out in product meetings and, oh, I'm a product person now, because the product person left and I'm the next best thing. And those kind of opportunities kind of like helped me fall upwards into where I was. And so I think like technology is kind of like a tool to an outcome. And if we lose sight of that, we lose, like people don't start companies because they want to um, invent something to invent it for inventing's sake. They want to solve a problem, they want to serve a market, they want to find a niche. And I think like people are like that too. And so that's kind of drove me in like my consultancy because people are kind of like, I talk to my clients and they're like, well, we have a website and people sign up for meetings and then they come to the meeting and we collect information and then we put it into our CRM and then we schedule another meeting. And it's just like people are kind of like, mouse trapping their way through their business plans. And the AI technology is kind of a force multiplier where we can stop doing things like copying and pasting stuff from Excel into a website and to email. And my clients kind of want a no nonsense approach to that isn't like, sign up for Microsoft and throw away all my products kind of thing. So a lot of my customers are they're really trying to find out like, if I buy everyone in my office a chat GPT seat, can they just do stuff themselves in a safe way and further their business and empower people? And the answer is kinda, and I think there's a lot of work that people have to do that. And so what I try to do is set people up to kind of like take the baton and run with it. I don't want to sell like a services contract or be on the hook for, being their Oracle into like Copilot. I want them to like understand how to use the technology and to leave it on the shelf when it's not suited to what they need to do.
I like the mousetrap mention. I'm not sure if all of the audience will get that board game kind of call out. It reminds me a little bit of Goonies, where there's just this really creative use of sequencing. You've described your career path as circuitous, pardon me, the hard word to pronounce this morning. How did that outsider's perspective end up becoming an advantage in how you approach clients and problems?
I think the main difference is like, I probably worked with hundreds of product teams in my life, either for them or as part of consultants or being a vendor. And then you realize there's a lot of things that are just kind of like cultural things that are immaterial to the process of doing the work, right? Like I have people come up to me and say, should I program this in C sharp or JavaScript or Python or should we use Agile or Kanban? And it's like, these are just like scaffolds for shaping the context of what you're building. And it should be immaterial. And it should often be like individual, like you, I'm talking to you on this app, and say if you wanted to call me in Teams and I wanted to call you on FaceTime, it shouldn't matter, right? It should just be like whatever app I have an app, you have an app, and they just talk. And the reason they don't just talk is because companies want to like be product owners and own stuff. And I think a lot of that kind of like uncertainty is exasperated in the AI age because now we have like AI logic and we have products and we have like safety and you have to like connect all these different things. And because we're moving things away from human being the person who copies and pastes it into a machine that copies and pastes it, now we have all kinds of security and compliance problems and stuff too. So
You mentioned a few decades that you've been in tech, and you've worked. We mentioned Microsoft. You've also worked at Walmart and Live Person, etc. Was there a pivotal moment that shaped your philosophy of building these conversational AI products?
I think it really was like the COVID years. Like, and I still think we are still dealing with the fallout of the COVID years, and it's still like a problem. Where like, um, I think before COVID and after COVID is going to be like one of those cultural moments, like
Yeah.
before like 9/11, after 9/11, where things change so materially in the social contract that the way you worked before doesn't work for the way you work after.
Hmm.
And I think the number one insight was that you don't need to go in the office to get work done at scale. and and I see there's like a lot of pushback on that, and there's like I I have opinions about that, but I think the material thing is like the systems are so distributed and human. Like I can sit here having an interview with you, from my home, and you're in your home,
Hmm.
and it's just as fine as we went into a studio together. Or I flew to your city or whatever, and we shouldn't let like these kind of like arbitrary things like disrupt the process. Like I've been in meetings so long about how to report the executive structure of the meeting to the executives, and you know how do we copy the notes from the meeting into Excel and then into a PowerPoint, and
Hmm.
create the artifact. And it's just like, we let's just create the artifact with AI and translate on the fly to whatever method the person who needs to see it wants to see it in. And that's kind of like a click moment for a lot of my clients because they're just like, oh yeah, if I am in Copilot and then all my products are using Microsoft Copilot, I can one click turn the meeting notes into a PowerPoint. And I don't think even Microsoft understands the power of that. Like, okay, if Microsoft owns 100% of my data, then I can easily do these things because the AI doesn't have to like cover every use case in the world. They can focus on Microsoft use cases.
Hmm.
And there's antitrust implications of this, and there's all things around that. But like that's kind of like the story. So if Microsoft could do that with my data, why can't I do that with my data? Right. So, for my venturous clients, I'm really talking about like how do we own your company's brain at the local level and then share what you need to Copilot and nothing more, right? We're not going to give Microsoft the privilege of training on our data because we pay them $30 a month,
Hmm.
and I think that is kind of like the way the future for clients. It's just like you own your brain. A person owns their brain on their personal computer, and you give these services just what you need, and you go to them when you're stumped. you know. So you go to AI to like help me build a script so I don't have to go to AI next time,
Hmm.
you know. And I think like um, that's bad news for the Sam Altmans of the world who want to be the everything app, but it's really good news for the small business owners because now maybe I don't have to buy everyone a $30 Copilot seat. Maybe I give some people the $30 Copilot seat and everyone else uses homegrown AI to solve answers about my business. And all of a sudden, something that seems incredibly expensive and unmaintainable is like approachable and sustainable.
Hmm. That's really interesting how you break down the choices that we or anyone is making or could make about how they want to run a business. A lot of those choices didn't really seem like they were on the menu pre-pandemic. Like you mentioned, there was this watershed moment, and in some cases, I think the larger corporations pivoted faster than expected. And in other situations, I think that they're still trying to force a square peg into a round hole. And when it comes to, I mean, this, we could, I don't want to spend too much time on this can of worms, but broadly speaking, remote work versus in-person work has come up from a few different angles, both from the employee side and the CEO side. And I've seen pros and cons on both. There's long commutes, there's inefficiency, there's camaraderie, there's all sorts of benefits and detriments to either choice. But I think what it unearthed is incentive structure. You mentioned with you and I, here we are fully present in our podcast because we each have an incentive for this to go well. We chose to do this. We weren't forced to do this, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that large corporate, well, I guess any corporation, I don't know why I said large, maybe thinking about Microsoft and stuff. But any business, I think, needs to consider what are the incentives for people to show up. How do we optimize what our goals are? You mentioned the intentionality behind product design. I thought of entrepreneurship too. There's a mirror there with, between the why. Why are we doing this? Rather than just saying I have a product or I'm an entrepreneur. It's like, well, what's the why? What's the driving force? And that can help you align the incentive structure, I think. But what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think being inside office is the only way you can do camaraderie
Mm-hmm.
and like ambient culture, right? Like I've been in companies that are like super Slack heavy companies and they're joking around and they have a joke Slack and they have a here's pictures of my cat Slack and you can get everything you get in an office, but the sanctity of your house,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I can have a really personal moment one on one with you, and how is that any different than running into the office? I think the randomness probably, like, or like I'm in open office and I hear you having a spirited debate about a topic that I'm vested in, and I can pop in over there and say something. So yeah, those are to me are like the material benefits. Like when I was a product at Microsoft, I went in 3 days a week, and today they announced everyone has to go 3 days a week, which is really going to be disruptive. But
Mm-hmm.
I went in 3 days a week because as a product owner, I needed to hear stuff that didn't happen inside teams. Like there was just like people want to talk off the record, people don't want to be on the company's microphone all the time, so they are naturally unguarded and they can get work done in a way that they'd be loath to do on teams because of, Clippy might be listening, right? And so I think there's that factor, like, and if your organization is really like trustful and like encourages like that skunk works mentality of a startup, I think you can overcome that even remote. But if you have kind of like the on the record, off the record kind of culture, like you would have at a megacorp or whatever, you kind of have to have in-person culture because you're so slow. Because then everything has to go through a meeting or an
Mm-hmm.
email, and you know, I think having a meeting with like 4 or 5 people in teams is fine. Having a meeting with 10,000 people in all hands is probably one of the worst tortures I've ever done in business, right? Because it's just like all of a sudden you're moderating a panel at Comic-Con for work, and I think like people kind of like they don't think of their communication tools that way
Mm-hmm.
when they're buying them, but really that's what it is. It's just like it shapes what you do. Like if
Yeah, totally.
Microsoft Teams, you can only do like 5 emojis for things out of the box, and Slack, you could upload every emoji you want, so you can have like mascots for thumbs up and thumbs down behavior that is powering, and I think that has a big impact of whether or not like people like Slack or hate Teams because of that culture is like comes from the ground up or comes from the top down.
Yeah, well said. And once again, it just reminded me of incentive structure. I've also had situations where there were check-in meetings daily from a remote team, and I think that we have these personal biases that are kind of like heuristics for sense making at speed that can help us. Obviously, they're around, but it can also trip us up, and it's tough to be sober in the moment and understand that I, as the business owner, want to hear in my daily check in that you're doing a great job. So I'm already like disadvantaged from using that as like a checkbox. And then you're probably after time, like this 15 minutes I could have spent polishing the products. And so it actually, I think, has a higher probability of doing the opposite of what it's intended to do, to where you would get better at just telling me what I want to hear, so you can
Ah,
be like go back to doing what you're doing. And then I think it's actually like a cultural contaminant rather than
yeah.
a like a glue. Do you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of think like there's like confirmation bias kind of thing, a Peter principle thing going on too, where you're like, you don't know if I'm playing Wordle while I'm talking to you,
Right.
or and
Yeah.
if you're trying to prove a negative, then yeah, you're like, well, I got to get Peter back in the office because every time I talk to him, he has a distracted look on his face, and maybe the distracted look on my face is, I'm neurodivergent, and that's how I listen.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
hmm.
And it's just like I'm listening to you, but I'm not making eye contact, and I look distracted
Hmm.
because my processing works better when I do that. And it would work even better if you let me turn my cameras off, but my leadership always wants me to turn my camera on during meetings to
Hmm.
show that I'm paying attention,
Hmm.
and like, that is uncomfortable for me or whatever. So I
Right.
think like pulling people back in the office doesn't fix that problem. It kind of just hides that problem, right? Because now you're looking at a room with eyes and you're not focused on Peter not looking at you and getting bothered by it. And and I think like that's kind of like I like we were forced into remote work in COVID
Mm,
without any evidence of how things worked before remote work. And then we went into remote work and we had a lot of telemetry, but we had no baseline. And so
hmm.
now we're going to throw everyone back into return to office. Uh, and we won't have any telemetry because then it will be going into the meat world and we don't have any kind of idea of things. So we're just vibing it,
Mm,
when we come back. And a lot of things I do with my clients is like when they're talking about, well, we need to make things more efficient with AI. And I'm like, well, how do you measure things today? And it's a vibe check. The daily stand up is the ultimate expression of the vibe check, right? Because you're trying, as leadership, you're trying to get the temperature of your report. And I think people, yeah, they're incentivized to glad hand that experience, right? As opposed to just saying, I've had people say, don't come to me with a problem unless you have the solution, and that is just like, then, you know, I can't talk about global warming. I can't talk about, you know, helping my community and all that because it's just like, you got to talk about problems sometimes. And it's just like, there's a forum for that, I think. And is it in a 5-minute stand up where everyone's just trying to say if they have a problem or not? No. But you can say, hey, I need to talk to you for an hour today about this problem. And you're like, cool, I'll prioritize you or I'll get
hmm.
that in. And I think that's what like a true like one-to-one, interface at a stand-up should be, where you're just kind of like, nope, heads down, I'll be done on Tuesday, or there's a serious problem, we need to have a chat about it.
Hmm.
And there's just compartmentalize it. Don't talk about it in the 50-minute stand-up and take everyone else's time. And that's the other thing about like uh, digital versus workplaces. You can side channel things and get people out of the loop that could be doing something better.
Hmm.
And I think we're going to have kind of like a wake up call, I think. And I feel like it's just driven by like, okay, I have a 30-year lease on this office building and I don't get my tax incentive unless it's 80% occupied. And so we're coming back into work for that. And not
Hmm.
because like productivity is down or a low earner is like milking the company by not coming to the office and wearing pants.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Like I think measuring that over time will make it more evident, the cost of not doing it, for example.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and if you want to play social scientist with your company's income and money and future, go ahead and do that, right?
Mm,
But I think you need to like make these choices carefully, right? Because especially like if my contract was like I work from home because I have to take care of a loved one,
mm,
and like being in the room next to him allows me to be a better worker, and I
mm,
could work longer hours for you and stuff, knowing that like my loved one is in the next room I can run to and help.
mm,
And if all of a sudden you say, well, you got to come into work 3 days a week or you're gone, or you
mm,
have to, we're moving the home office to Bentonville and you have to move there, or you can't work remotely anymore. And it's just like, you're forcing me to quit,
mm.
right? And it's like, and that's just like bad for all the employees who don't quit, right? Because they're like now bummed out that they're losing someone over something silly.
You call yourself mayor of Toilville.
Yeah.
Pretty creative title. What's the story behind that, and what problem is
Uh,
Toilville ultimately trying to solve?
I think there's a lot of work that's done for the sake of work, right? Like we talk about the stand up and we talk about the executive report and the PowerPoint and the Excel and the Loop and the Notion. And it's just kind of like, um, you know, I can look at you watch the news at the end of the day and it's like a custom report of the events and the financials and the weather. And if we're all digital, why can't that just be generated in the way you like it for the person? Why are we spending time making artifacts when we could be focusing on work? And so when I say I'm the mayor of Toyville, it's like I think everyone is the mayor of their own digital life, right? Everyone is, and like in a company, and you can look at like, the history of like capital going back to 1800s. It's been kind of like top down restrictive and like you give it up you give it's like zero. We talk about zero trust models. This is like a zero authority models. So the CEO gives away financial authority to a CFO and the technological authority to a CTO, and they trickle that down to the lowest reports. And but if that system's all in place, then why do we even need to like have reports and these like, because the data should all just trickle up as well as it trickles down, right? And I think that just kind of shows how antiquated many org charts are. And I think AI is able to kind of like do things that you couldn't do before. So, you have really amazing PMOs and project managers, and they hold your company together in a way you'll never see. So if you can make them be able to do more without burning out, then that's the force multiplier, not like AI coding or AI assistants, because you need the trickle of information to make you faster than the big guys.
Hmm.
Like I talk to business owners who are like, I was working for a company, I got burned out, and I want to do things my way. And so me and five guys do it my way, and I make more money than I did in the big company. Um, so I can work faster and win businesses, but I don't have 50,000 employees to distribute, and I can only expand to these five people. So why not just make them like as stacked with technology as you can, and everyone's off the clock at 5 o'clock, and they go home, and there's no fires to put out and all that. Like that is your strategic advantage. So you can't pay as much as the fangs of the world, but you can tell people they're going home at 5 and they can work from home and they can take off the afternoon to see their kids' baseball game.
Hmm.
Those are kind of like how you're gonna like keep talent and win deals and stuff in the future, I think, versus like hoping to get acquired as a unicorn.
Yeah, it's interesting. The things money can't buy having more value. Uh, you have mentioned um, that Toilville aims to reset expectations in an industry full of anti patterns.
Mm.
What do you see as the most harmful conversational AI anti patterns today?
I think the concept of autonomous agents is probably the worst thing about the current wave of AI, because it precludes a future where like I run Toyoville, and if I had a bot that just made decisions on my behalf, um, and I didn't have my awesome staff and my people, and like I think like the the order of operations is all wrong. Like I think agents are like R2D2. They talk and they whistle and they do things and they do jobs, but they don't like give you their opinion about life like C3PO does, and they don't annoy you with chatter, and they certainly don't make decisions on their own because you want Luke and Han Solo and all those folks to make the decisions to be the heroes. And if you can create a world like that where like, okay, I like on my computer, the first agent I built was an agent to stop agents from doing things on their own. And now all the agents are basically glorified scripts. And the agentic part comes in when they encounter a novel problem. And they work on it and they show me, should I try this boss? And I look at it, I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever read. Or I change it or I make notes or like, you read my mind. And once I started doing that, I stopped getting like hallucinations. I stopped getting like bad decisions, and like I started getting things I approve. So I'm not at the point where I would let it happen autonomously, but at least it's like giving me suggestions that like fit like a glove versus like out of left field stuff that I would never do in a million years. which was like the first like 30% at the time. So
Yeah, that's to be honest, the scale and speed that comes up when we talk about AI and agents is just mind-boggling. I've heard that they can think 10,000 times faster, and you mentioned hallucinations, and sometimes it's a great idea they come up with. Sometimes it's the opposite. And if it's moving that fast at scale, uh, I don't know if we can afford a mistake. And then
yeah.
how can you have the foresight to tell it how to cure cancer for us? It just it seems like a really like a potential of like amazing opportunity, but also it's almost like a child with this super advanced puzzle they don't know how to solve. How does your team balance cutting edge AI with the practical needs of business and communities?
I for my summer vacation this year, I lived my life as Sam Altman wants me to live my life, and I just did only apps. So I told the team to go on vacation, and I built everything apps, Claude Code, ChatGPT, um, and at the end of the week, my coding assistants made me 3,000 scripts, right? And so then I did a coding analysis of those 3,000 scripts, and there was only 250 novel scripts in those scripts. So 80% inefficient, where it just brute force its way through my problems every time. It didn't look at the corpus of things that we've already built and just rebuilt it. And so that informed the decision of my like dumb non-AI system that goes in front of it that just filters the input and the output plan before it even shows it to me. And just like, it's like, we've tried that. Or, no, we already built a database. Look at the database instead of making yet another database. And now I have 11 apps. So 3,000 to 300 to 11 in like 4 weeks,
Wow.
and they're all very centralized. And some of these apps are getting smaller and smaller as other apps get bigger and get subsumed to it. And so now I have kind of like a framework for the creativity of hallucinations, right? Because sometimes you find a new way to do things, or you give it a use case and you come up with a novel script and a way to either um, upgrade the tools that we could do with, we trust with our clients, or become new tools that we offer to our clients. And like, so the whole idea of alpha, beta, whatever, is tested out by us in our dog feeding. And I think that is such a powerful modifier, especially for like, I don't have like huge CTO, and I don't have people who went to Stanford and work for me who like done enterprise grade stuff. And I can just now tell my system like, okay, that script was super useful. What do I have to do to offer this to a company that uses enterprise grade trust? It's like, oh, and so all my tools are now platform agnostic.
Hmm.
They're they're programming language agnostic. They're human spoken language agnostic, and they're now AI system agnostic, because all we need is that thin translation layer to talk to OpenAI or to Microsoft or to Google. And 5 weeks, I went from that 3,000 vibe experiment to where I'm at now, and it kind of like made my mind explode with like the possibility of it. Where it's just like, oh yeah, every entrepreneur should definitely be doing this. Also, my little watcher looks for opportunities to stop going to AI so much. So now I use 80% less tokens a day than when I started. And so, so for my personal user, my personal desktop is down $3,000 a month in API cost.
So you're like you're making it prejudiced in your favor. Like help me not overuse your people. your
Well, so I feel like this golden age of AI, if we're in a bubble,
uh,
it's definitely heavily subsidized, because I went from the consumer models to the API grade models. And so the consumer model is like the $200 a month chat GPT. And I was doing direct to API access, and I pulled $180 a day in
wow.
API cost. So they're definitely like taking a bath on some of this usage and trialing, in the hopes that you just become attached at the hip to those companies, right? At an enterprise level, because that's their unicorn bet. And I think that's not sustainable either.
That's a really important thing that you highlight there. go, going back a step, I like how you highlighted some of the benefits after we kind of laid the ground on some of the cautions with using AI. For me, I'm not. I wouldn't consider myself a coder, but I've used it as a crutch to translate in languages when I'm working with people halfway around the world, as well as to code in languages I don't know.
Mm,
And there have been mistakes, like it says, "Oh, this is all you need to do: copy paste this," and I do, and it doesn't work. And then it troubleshoots with me, and we go back and forth. And after maybe 3 passes, it works. And I'm like, I don't know that I would have been able to do this without that help. Now you could say you could have gone on Reddit or GitHub or something, talked to a few humans, and figured it out, maybe, but they might not have had the patience. And there's just all these. It opens up a new possibility where um, things are happening that didn't happen before, and that's something that does fill me with optimism. Curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely like a 10x engineer if Stack Overflow is part of my stack. Like I'm a good Googler. I think my secret weapon as a product person was my creative background as a writer and as a member of communities and stuff like that and a listener. And understanding like the next step problems. So like a technological problem is like, okay, here's our 10 requirements, and once we ship them, we're good. But you think about the next day, it's like, well, the next day, you know, there's a saying that goes back to the Greeks that like the ship was the invention of the shipwreck.
mm,
There were zero shipwrecks before ships were invented, right? And now shipwrecks is a problem.
mhm,
And I think product people who are inventing new technologies or even, you know, duct taping together multiple technologies into your process have to understand like problems beget problems, and yet
mm,
you're never really done with that. Um, so I think like that's absolutely a valid point. Like people should allow, and that's like the play of work, right? People need to be able to play around with stuff, and then they go back to work with their new system and be 5x or 10x better.
mm,
The problem I had with my like Vibe Coder AI Summit was that 3,000 scripts. Like I was playing every single step and from scratch. Like
mm,
like it didn't know me or didn't have anything. So the only way it worked was either I, allow OpenAI to take a memory of my life and know like my wife's name and all this personal information, or I did the other way and I built the simple chatbot that just like filtered what I said down to tokens
mm,
and just put the novel tokens to the AI and or ran the script. So and I think like that's kind of like the unsustainableness of like our bubble right now is that no
mm.
one's making a tool that like says, "Oh man, you've been using the same prompt for 3 weeks. If you just made if you just made like a database, I could just mail you this report and you wouldn't have to use Chat Copilot for this, right?"
Right.
And I think like we're totally missing out on this opportunity, and like things like people like Microsoft have kind of blown a 24-month lead trying to make the genie wish happen when really like the king's decree is what they should be doing, right? Where you're figuring out like 80% of our searches are around this bug, so maybe we should fix this bug,
Hmm.
kind of stuff. So
Really interesting point. You've mentioned dealing with urgency as a weapon in past roles. What have you learned about setting boundaries and preventing randomization in product teams?
I think like, and this is like I think it is a personal problem and a leadership problem where the novel problem tends to get more attention than the endemic problem, right?
Mm,
So like you always hear from AI leaders like ethical AI is hard, right? Because society is unethical. And like if I run things at scale, and I invented ethical AI for the system that I did in the third day. And the, and the reason was no information goes out or no information comes in until I can measure if it's ethical or not. And it's like, well, how do you measure ethics? Like, I don't know. I gave it a number, and every day I make that number more defined by looking at numbers. And that's kind of like mind-blowing moment for a lot of people. It's like, oh, I could just say something is a racism, or I can say something is, my legal risk,
mhm,
or whatever my company trust rules are, and just put a number on it and just measure it every day, and then find out, you know, too tight is like I can't do any work,
mhm,
and too loose, bad things happen to people that I want to protect, both business-wise and my personal ethics and the law,
mhm,
right? And so that's kind of like the competitive advantage of like when you go with Microsoft Copilot is like they have all these systems lying around in their ecosystem. So if you pay for them and turn them on, this kind of happens for you. But now you're like chained at the hip to that platform for the rest of your life because you don't know how to do it for yourself. So
How do you coach founders and small businesses who may not speak the language of AI but want to leverage it effectively?
I always tell people that it's easier for you to learn what AI can and can't do for yourself than it is for me to learn your core business strengths, right? So I talk to people who are like insurance brokers or talk to families and buy insurance plans. It's like, you know, they'll never make an app to get rid of that in a million years. I think that is like so far away from the future possibility. So what are the things that like taking you away from using that strength to get more and more customers? And that's data entry
Mm.
and applying to different brokers and setting up meetings. And these are all like structural problems that tech industry has kind of solved. The problem is like you don't have the landscape capacity to see all the connections of how to do the optimal way. So maybe AI can help you kind of like just structure things in a conversation in a way that you can see all that stuff and you just tell it like, well, it's got to do these 30 things and what's the cheapest way to do it and what is the most expensive way to do it and what's the least acceptable compromise between that, that I could do now and how can I get there in 6 months and 12 months with the money I save from the thing shipping the thing I saved, you know.
You've said something that mirrors my own kind of path. And I imagine we probably were on different paths when we arrived at this. But it deals with curiosity. You've said it's more powerful than asserting opinions, and I had to humble myself to come to that realization by living abroad for a while. And now I've said a number of times that I think a good North Star is curiosity, and to try to measure any deviation from that. Like Peter said something that makes me not curious. Why do I feel not curious about that? And really investigate that more than trying to impose my opinion on or my beliefs or whatever on what you said. How do you cultivate curiosity in teams that might be under pressure to just deliver?
I think that's super critical to doing that. And I think the way I run my business is different a lot way than my clients run their business. For me, I think like, so I invented this system and it's heavily technology driven. And how do I work with someone who only wants to work in a notebook? Or someone who, but their brain works so well in a notebook and I love the way they come out of a notebook. How do I empower that kind of situation to happen? And I think that comes to your kind of like tolerance of like different paths to the same destination is really essential for small companies because, like big companies, they can only get where they're going if everyone gets in the bus at the same time and gets there at the same time. But
Mm-hmm.
small companies can kind of play throughout the day and get where they're going. And maybe they'll knock off at 3 o'clock because they finished 3 hours early,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that is kind of like the strength of the smaller unit is that ability to kind of like embrace differences and support differences and get like better and faster work out of things in a way that's more flexible instead of waiting 6 months to find out that the thing you shipped is not appropriate to design. You can ship it that night, and then every day it's maybe 5% closer to what the thing needs to be. And that's kind of like a new paradigm, I think, to me that I'm not hearing from these tech giants because it's their death knell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's like kind of goes to like empowerment of like the early open web where, you have your 5-person startup and you are 40% TAM in a year, because you made the better mousetrap, and people are going nuts over it. You do instead of being the unicorn, you can just be kind of like the empire, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can just kind of like or you could just stay at 5 people and everyone now works 4 days a week, and those 5 people now have 3 people who help them do their thing and everyone is paid great and you never have to like go to a VC meeting with investors and put dumb features in your product.
There's something really deceptively powerful in what you shared. I mean, I think in addition to what you shared, I think like kind of a
Yeah.
parallel, which is sometimes we don't know what we want. Like we see, you know, uh, this news of these sky high valuations,
Mhm.
and we start to think that I need that in order to feel good enough, or I need that to prove something. And I think just kind of, I work in business coaching, and sometimes sitting down with people and asking like, why do you want, you get to like the underlying motivation, and it's not that at all oftentimes. And sometimes people would be better served maybe earning a quarter million a year, and like you said, working 4-day weeks, or spending time with their family and friends, and they realized that actually that other stuff was almost a distraction. But it sometimes takes some investigation to realize that. And what do you think is like driving this mismatch? Because it seems to be more frequent these days.
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of startup experience, and I've had companies that exited well, and I've companies that exited poorly. And the ones that exited well were exiting because they were profitable ventures that were better than market rate returns on our ventures investment, but it wasn't unicorn it wasn't 8x or 10x return, and they were tired of coming to board meetings, so they sold it because opportunity came along, right? And that's the thing you have to do when you're in like a D round or E round or F round, right? Where you're just like, oh, I no longer have the control of my ship, and like the board wants to like they're tired of this market and they want to go to the next shiny thing, and that's fine. That's like the deal you made with the VC. But I've done numbers of like alternate funding models and stuff like that, and um, I think the most amazing thing to it is like the companies that I exited from, they were at a better than market return value already in terms of revenue, and year over year was forecasting to be steady or better.
Mhm.
And if I was a plumber or like a contractor, that'd be wildly successful business, right? And because I'm in the tech industry, it was kind of a flop,
Mhm.
right? Because we didn't get to buy an island and the ships and stuff like that. And that's just like such a weird value system, I think, for me as a business owner. Where it's just like, you know what, I just make like 5 families happy and comfortable. Like that would be amazing, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't have to take VC money. I can do it from client revenue, and I can do other things to grow things traditionally. And so in 2 years, if someone wants to like leave or not, they can leave, and they're not going to miss out on RSUs or any of the other trick people get stuck today. And I just think that's like a better way to do business with individuals. And maybe I won't get like to rub elbows with people in Davos or whatever the outcome is of being a tech giant, but it's just like, you know, maybe my daughter can go to a zoo in a different city this year, and stuff like that. And I think that's good enough. And I think people need to kind of like recalibrate their aspirations, because if you focus too hard on a KPI, it becomes, it's like the daily stand-up number, where you just start like, oh, our number 3 today, it was 2 yesterday, we're doing good.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, like people put in a 12-hour shift, and they missed their kid's baseball game and whatever it had it took to get 3, and you have complete disconnect from like the reality of what it takes to like drive numbers. So
Speaking of numbers, looking 5 to 10 years ahead, what role do you think conversational AI will play in everyday business, and what's the human element that must remain?
I think conversational AI, it will be connective tissue, and I think humans will always be the orchestration.
Hmm.
And I think like the reason that works is like the AI, conversational AI is your Ma Bell of the future, and you use it at the level you need to use it. And so I think right now, like tech is telling us where we use what, so that's how you get Clippy. You're forced to use Clippy to like do things in a product. And it's just like, having a chat in Word is useful sometimes, but in other times it's like a pain, right? Because now you got to like, you have to write like a diary entry to create a report,
Mhm.
when you can just click a button that says run morning report,
Mhm.
you know, and people get so like sky-eyed on the implementation and the methodology. So if conversational AI becomes like ubiquitous, where like sometimes it's a button, sometimes it's a keypad, sometimes it's a keyboard, sometimes it's an Xbox controller, sometimes it's my headset. And now we have an adaptive world that can adapt to people of all abilities and positions and jobs. And I think that's the only way it's going to become ubiquitous versus like, I have to wear Zuckerberg's dumb glasses and like,
How do you
you
really
know,
feel about them?
I mean, you know, if you have that much money, maybe pay a stylist to pick the glasses. That's what I'll say about that. But it's just like that's why these things fail because the idea is not terrible. It's the execution because it's filtered through the opinions and the biases of the person. And if there's a situation where like, okay, I want to wear super cool 80s glasses and you could wear super professional work glasses and like, just pick my glasses, I think then it wouldn't predicate it on like buying into a single entrepreneur's vision and it
Mm,
would like take off.
mm.
So I think that's kind of like why we don't have Snapchat glasses anymore. We don't have Google Glass anymore. It's because there was no ecosystem to like, I should just be able to go lens crafters and pick my glasses and then throw the thing into it, and that never came to pass. So,
What's been the most surprising or even fun use of conversational AI you've come across recently?
um, I really like how I've been working conversational AI for 15 years, and it went from kind of like the press one, press nine on the phone to being something that you kind of talk free form with things, and still bad, but like the fact that it's not awful is very empowering to me because I think a lot of people, when they go to a search engine or when they go to call a company with a problem, they don't really understand the way to ask, or they don't even know what the question is. They just kind of like want to express the need. And so, the first time in human history, you can just kind of like tell someone your problem to a machine,
Mhm,
and it can kind of at least get you in the ballpark of like the solution. And so now you don't have to be good at Googling or you don't have to be patient at waiting on hold for Wells Fargo to get answers. You can just kind of like say your problem and AI can kind of get you to the right department. And
mhm,
I think that is kind of like a huge like boon to people, especially if people of all abilities. And, you don't have to be like from California accented English to like talk to machines now. And I think that is probably the number one thing they've gotten right with AI. The problem is like Gen AI is purely as inference is super expensive, right? And it's just like, so we need to like find a way to like use the AI to force multiply the translation process into a way that's repeatable and cheap.
mhm,
And so if we can kind of like figure these things out and just like, you know, we could just do an old chatbot, but the chatbot is like trained so when you stump it, it doesn't say error, it does not compute. It goes in the AI and the AI figures out a temporary fix. And then we take the temporary fixes and we determine here's the feature we add to the bot to prevent these temporary fixes from being needed. I think that's kind of like the sustainable long-term way of using this technology.
If you were to give your younger self one piece of advice before entering the tech world today, what would it be?
Um, I would say trust your instincts about imposter syndrome.
Hmm,
And I think like, I grew up kind of like very progressive spaces like punk rock music and underground stuff and spaces driven by like diverse voices and genders and gender presentation and that has never steered me as wrong as going into like mainstream spaces driven by uh, traditional things of authority and so a lot of the like is it me or is it my job kind of thing has gone away now, so like I know my boundaries better and I know like what's a good situation when I talk to clients. Some clients I have to let go because it's just like, okay, we've filled the contract. This isn't working for me, but good luck kind of
hmm,
thing, because they just run their company in a way that is like a bother to me.
hmm.
And I think that's the freedom all employees should have with their contractor employee relationship where it's just like, cool, we shipped the thing we said we would. I have the flexibility where I can choose not to work with you anymore, have a good life, and that's kind of the future I see for things where, it's bad to not have the stability of a job, but if you can have the freedom that like the top contractors have with your career and still be able to care for your family and have your insurance and own a home, whatever your goals are, uh, to me, that's way better than a unicorn exit, right? Where, you have to like grind it out and have grind mindset to like make it happen.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on in our conversation that you feel you'd really like to highlight before we close?
No, I would just encourage people, especially the non-technical people, to kind of like whenever you evaluate a piece of technology, just have a list of what you want to do, what you do today, and what are the non-negotiables. Like what are things you won't give up in the way of your process to do a thing. And just kind of understand when you start using any new software, the compromises you make. Because I think a lot of people like use tools despite their love of it, you know, and if you can like use it to like reduce your reliance on things that make your life worse, your work process will improve.
Well, thank you for your chat today. Is really interesting getting your perspective. A lot of it resonates with my own path. And where can people get in touch with you and follow along with what you're doing?
Yeah, you can reach us on the web. Our website is itstoyville.com. And starting up next month, we do office hours weekly on LinkedIn and YouTube. And they're basically forums like this where people can kind of talk about their problems, and I can tell you what I think, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. We can have fun about it. So,
Great. Sounds like a great opportunity. Well, thanks, Peter.
all right, have a good day.
You too.